So hello, welcome. Today I would like to tell you about a book that I have been reading all my life. I already mentioned it in the previous video. A book that has been with me since the time when I was very young, when I was 15 or 16, which I discovered in my mother's shelf, and I took it out and I read it, and then I, took it as my own, and I have been reading it since then. It went with me to Germany, where I studied, from Greece, where I originally grew up, and then when I went to Hong Kong, I took it with me. And so now it's still here, it's somewhere around here in this room. And I often think that if, after a plane crash, I ended up on a desert island, the only book that I would want to have with me is this one and not any other book. It is a book that contains the whole world within it and everything that it means to be human. Let me read you a little bit of this book.
In the shade of the house, in the sunshine of the riverbank near the boats, in the shade of the salwood forest, in the shade of the fig tree is where Siddhartha grew up, the handsome son of the Brahman, the young falcon, together with his friend Govinda, son of a Brahman. The sun tanned his light shoulders by the banks of the river when bathing, performing the sacred ablutions, the sacred offerings. In the mango grove, shade poured into his black eyes. When playing as a boy, when his mother sang, when the sacred offerings were made, when his father the scholar taught him, when the wise men talked.
So begins one of the most remarkable books of the 20th century, and to feel the impact of this language you have to read it out, loud, slowly, like a poem, letting the words flow, letting the repetitions unfold. And I sometimes imagine that this would be like in the ancient times. People listened to Homer, the Iliad and the Odyssey, when you had the rhapsodes going around the country and repeating these poems for an audience. And this is in all these traditional cultures where reading and writing is not common. They used to have these epic tales that were memorized through the use of rhyme. And this is similar here, so this is something that Hesse wants to do, to give us this sense of an ancient text, of an ancient tale. Thankfully, the translation here does a good job of preserving this feeling of the original text. Henry Miller, who is another one of my favorite writers we will talk about here, once said that this book, Hermann Hesse Siddhartha, is, he wrote, a more potent medicine than the New Testament. After Hesse's death in the 1960s, the book was embraced by the US counterculture, by the hippie movement, and many writers of the time admired Hesse and this tale of a development of a young person. Timothy Leary, for example, was a fan of Hesse's book, and Kurt Vonnegut wrote that Siddhartha was Hesse's simplest, clearest, most innocent tale of seeking and finding. But today, when we read Henry Miller and when we read Kerouac and Persic, we read those more for the historical value. We don't read them perhaps so much because the tales speak to us as inspirational books. But with Hesse it is different, because the tale is so far away from our everyday situation, because it's set in this almost mythical India, this fictional place of the stories of Buddha. It happens to transcend fashion and historical contingencies, and it speaks directly to every reader, no matter where they are, whether they are in 1920s Germany or in 2020s Shenzhen or Hong Kong. In the book, Siddhartha is an educated, well-off son of a high-caste Indian priest in a village at the time of Buddha's life. It is no accident that Siddhartha has the same name as the Buddha himself, and throughout the books he goes on a journey of enlightenment, and he lives many lives. In this one life, he takes on many roles. He becomes a hermit, a merchant, a lover, and then at the end a broken man, until he finally finds what he is searching for, the wisdom he is searching for. The story begins in their ancestral village where Siddhartha grows up to be a handsome, educated, promising young man. And I read you a little more of the beginning of the book now, where Hesse describes Siddhartha's life in the village.
For a long time, Siddhartha had been partaking in the discussions of the wise men, practicing debate with Govinda, practicing with Govinda the art of reflection, the service of meditation. He already knew how to speak the Om silently, the word of words, to speak it silently into himself while inhaling, to speak it silently out of himself while exhaling, with all the concentration of his soul, the forehead surrounded by the glow of the clear-thinking spirit. He already knew to feel Atman in the depths of his being, indestructible, one with the universe.
But Siddhartha is not only good at the spiritual teachings, he is also popular with his family and friends. And this is what follows here, the next description from the book.
Joy leapt in his father's heart for his son, who was quick to learn, thirsty for knowledge. He saw him growing up to become a great wise man and priest, a prince among the Brahmins. Bliss leapt in his mother's breast when she saw him walking, when she saw him sit down and get up. Siddhartha, strong, handsome, he who was walking on slender legs, greeting her with perfect respect. Love touched the hearts of the Brahmins' young daughters when Siddhartha walked through the lanes of the town, with the luminous forehead, with the eye of a king, with his slim hips.
See how beautifully Hesse describes this person, and how everyone loves him for different reasons, from his father, his mother, to the girls in the village, that all find different qualities in him, but he is the focal point of all these qualities. He is the person who you would think is already perfect at this moment, but he is not, and this is what will become clear in just a moment, that Siddhartha himself is unhappy with the way his life is going. And although outside it looks like a perfect life, in reality, a lot is missing, and Siddhartha has to go away and get it. And this is again a romantic thing, the growing up phase of a person, where a young person feels that they need to go out and see the world and conquer the world and learn from it to become truly grown up. And this is what Siddhartha is going to do in a moment.
Siddhartha had started to nurse discontent in himself. He had started to feel that the love of his father and the love of his mother, and also the love of his friend, Govinda, would not bring him joy forever and ever, would not nurse him, feed him, satisfy him.
So Siddhartha is not at ease with himself, and this becomes clear in the next passage.
He had started to suspect that his venerable father and his other teachers, that the wise Brahmins had already revealed to him the most and best of their wisdom, that they had already filled his expecting vessel with their richness, and the vessel was not full. The spirit was not content. The soul was not calm. The heart was not satisfied.
So we get this description of Siddhartha, who is unhappy with his life, who feels that something is missing, some wisdom is eluding him. And then next, a group of ascetics come through Siddhartha's village, beggars who are on a spiritual journey. And here is the description from the book.
3 skinny, withered men, neither old nor young, with dusty and bloody shoulders, almost naked, scorched by the sun, surrounded by loneliness, strangers and enemies to the world, strangers and lank jackals in the realm of humans. Behind them blew a hot scent of quiet passion, of destructive service, of merciless self-denial.
When Siddhartha sees them, he knows if there is a secret that has eluded him until now, then these people must have it, must be in the possession of it. And so if he wants to improve, if he wants to reach for the wisdom that he's feeling he's missing, he has to go with them. He has to give up everything and go with them. And this again is a very common trope, right? A very common kind of story where someone is in need of a change, in need of some impulse for their growing. And like Jesus, they go to the desert for a number of days to be alone, to meditate and to find themselves. And so Siddhartha also goes on this journey. He goes away from whatever feels comforting to him, whatever is well known to him, into a situation that is new and demanding and where he has to prove himself. Now here is the passage where Siddhartha and Govinda decide to leave the village.
In the evening, after the hour of contemplation, Siddhartha spoke to Govinda. "Early tomorrow morning, my friend, Siddhartha will go to the Samanas. He will become a Samana."
His friend is as surprised by this decision as his father is appalled. Both oppose it, but in the end, neither the opposition of the father nor of the friend are successful. One early morning, Siddhartha leaves everything behind and walks towards the edge of the village, following the three naked ascetics.
As he slowly left on stiff legs in the first light of day of the still quiet town, a shadow rose near the last hut, who had crouched there and joined the pilgrim, Govinda. "You have come," said Siddhartha, and smiled. "I have come," said Govinda.
So Siddhartha and Govinda are united again, and now they stay together with the Samanas for 3 years and learn to live like them. And again, you will notice the mythical dimension in that. 3 years, right, is a magical number. 3 years is how much you need to fulfill a phase of life or to achieve a particular kind of wisdom. And so Siddhartha learns to fast, to hunger, to kill the desires of his body, and to slowly become pure soul. And here is Hesse's description of the life with the Samanas.
Instructed by the oldest of the Samanas, Siddhartha practiced self-denial, practiced meditation, according to a new Samana rule. A heron flew over the bamboo forest, and Siddhartha accepted the heron into his soul, flew over forest and mountains, was a heron, ate fish, felt the pangs of a heron's hunger, spoke the heron's croak, died a heron's death. A dead jackal was lying on the sandy bank, and Siddhartha's soul slipped inside the body, was the dead jackal, lay on the banks, got bloated, stank, decayed, was dismembered by hyenas, was skinned by vultures, turned into a skeleton, turned to dust, was blown across the fields. And Siddhartha's soul returned, had died, had decayed, was scattered as dust, had tasted the gloomy intoxication of the cycle, awaited in new thirst like a hunter in the gap, where he could escape from the cycle, where the end of the causes, where an eternity without suffering began.
At the end of this passage, we already see what is about to come next. Although Siddhartha can escape his desires, his upbringing, his knowledge, his social role, he cannot escape the cycles of death and reincarnation. The eternity without suffering stays eternally out of his reach. And so when one day word of a new teaching reaches them, Siddhartha is ready to leave the Samanas and seek enlightenment elsewhere. And here is this moment in the book.
A man had appeared, Gautama by name, the Exalted One, the Buddha. He had overcome the suffering of the world in himself and had halted the cycle of rebirths. He was said to wander through the land, teaching, surrounded by disciples, without possession, without home, without a wife, in the yellow cloak of an ascetic, but with a cheerful brow, a man of bliss, and Brahmins and princes would bow down before him and would become his students.
So Siddhartha and Govinda leave the Samanas and they go to find the Buddha. It is not difficult for them to follow the rumors and the stories of the wise man who is traveling across India, the holy man and his disciples, and after a while they meet him, they go to the garden where he is teaching, they hear his teachings, and Govinda decides to stay with the Buddha. He is convinced that the Buddha has the wisdom that will help him find peace and become a whole person. But in a memorable scene, Siddhartha and the Buddha very briefly meet and exchange a few words. And here is this passage.
I wish that you, O Exalted One, would not be angry with me, said the young man. But let me say this one more thing. I have not doubted in you for a single moment. I have not doubted for a single moment that you are Buddha, that you have reached the goal, the highest goal towards which so many thousands of Brahmins and sons of Brahmins are on their way. You have found salvation from death. It has come to you in the course of your own search, on your own path, through thoughts, through meditation, through realizations, through enlightenment. It has not come to you by means of teachings, and thus is my thought, O Exalted One. Nobody will obtain salvation by means of teachings. This is what I have thought and realized when I have heard the teachings. This is why I am continuing my travels, not to seek other, better teachings, for I know there are none, but to depart from all teachings and all teachers, and to reach my goal by myself, or to die. But often I'll think of this day, O Exalted One, and of this hour, when my eyes beheld a holy man.
So Govinda will stay with the Buddha, and after going through much together, the two friends finally part. Govinda takes the yellow robe of the monk, while Siddhartha goes back to the dusty country road to find his own salvation, or his own death.
How deaf and stupid have I been, he thought, walking swiftly along. When someone reads a text, wants to discover its meaning, he will not scorn the symbols and letters and call them deceptions, coincidence, and worthless hull, but he will read them, he will study and love them, letter by letter. But I, who wanted to read the book of the world and the book of my own being, I have, for the sake of a meaning I had anticipated before I read, scorned the symbols and letters. I called the visible world a deception, called my eyes and my tongue coincidental and worthless forms without substance. No, this is over. I have awakened. I have indeed awakened, and have not been born before this very day. In thinking these thoughts, Siddhartha stopped once again, suddenly, as if there was a snake lying in front of him on the path, because suddenly he had also become aware of this. He, who was indeed like someone who had just woken up or like a newborn baby, he had to start his life anew and start again at the very beginning. When he had left on this very morning from the grove Jetavana, the grove of that exalted one, already awakening, already on the path towards himself, he had every intention, regarded as natural and took for granted, that he, after years as an ascetic, would return to his home and his father. But now only in this moment, when he stopped as if a snake was lying on his path, he also awoke to this realization. But I am no longer the one I was. I am no ascetic anymore. I am not a priest anymore. I am no Brahman anymore. Whatever should I do at home and at my father's place? Study? Make offerings? Practice meditation? But all this is over. All of this is no longer alongside my path. Motionless Siddhartha remained standing there, and for the time of one moment and breath his heart felt cold. He felt a cold in his chest as a small animal, a bird or a rabbit would, when seeing how alone he was. For many years he had been without home and had felt nothing. Now he felt it. Still, even in the deepest meditation, he had been his father's son, had been a Brahmin, of a high caste, a cleric. Now he was nothing but Siddhartha, the awoken one, nothing else was left. Out of this moment, when the world melted away all around him, when he stood alone like a star in the sky, out of this moment of a cold and despair, Siddhartha emerged, more self than before, more firmly concentrated. He felt. This had been the last tremor of the awakening, the last struggle of this birth, and it was not long until he walked again in long strides, started to proceed swiftly and impatiently, heading no longer for home, no longer to his father, no longer back.
And here with this ends the first part of the book. Hesse took a break after this because he had difficulty imagining how to continue the book. He knew that what would come next would be beyond his own experience. Everybody has the experience of growing up, of leaving home, perhaps in different ways, but it's a basic experience that many human beings make. But what comes later, the path towards enlightenment, is something that only very few have, and so Hesse felt that he is not yet ready to write this part. But Hesse continued, and finally, Siddhartha will achieve the enlightenment he is looking for at the end of the book. Now, this video is getting a little too long, so let me stop here for today. Next week, we will see how the tale unfolds further, and we will discuss a few points of note regarding Hesse Siddhartha, which, in my opinion, is one of the greatest books ever written. Thank you, and see you again next time.